Uh, we have now finished the parables of what it means to love in the month of February. And now for the season of Lent, we're going through the parables of Jesus. Because ultimately, Easter is all about giving the glory and the recognition of what Jesus did on the cross. And so we found no better way to do this by sharing, what did Jesus preach? What did he teach during his time on earth? And one of the most effective ways that Jesus taught his people, his disciples, his followers, even tried to teach the Pharisees, the best effective way he taught people was through parables. And so for the next 4 weeks before Easter Sunday, we're going to be going through some of the parables of Jesus. And this morning, we are found ourselves in Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. It's the parable of the shrewd manager. And many of you have probably heard it. And it really talks about being wise with money. But there are some problems within the parables that a lot of religious folks and a lot of scholars, a lot of religious scholars have problems understanding this parable. Because in one way, it seems to say that God is advocating for doing wrong. And it's a really weird thing, but we're going to go through that this morning. But before we do, I want to just give you a short summary of the money statistics in the Bible. And it's amazing that Jesus talks about money more than any other subject in his parables. Out of the 36 of Jesus' parables, 16 of the, out of the 38 parables that Jesus spoke of, 16 of them deal with money and possessions. That's 42% of his entire teaching throughout the parables. Secondly, nearly 25% of Jesus' words in the New Testament deal with biblical stewardship. A lot of his words talk about how we use money and how we should use money. Third, I found out statistically that 1 out of 10 verses in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 10% of them deal with money. It is a stark reality. And then finally, this I thought was the best statistic of all. Most surprising, not the best. There are more than 2,000 scriptures on tithing in the Bible, money, and possessions in the Bible, which is twice as many as faith and prayer combined. Do you understand that the Bible talks more about money than talking about prayer and talking about faith combined? And so with this understanding, I think it's important to note that according to God and according to Jesus' heart, money is actually a very, very important subject. And that is why when he is in front of a massive crowd and he's in front of his disciples, he tells them this parable found in Luke 16. I'm going to read verses 1 to 2. Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you can be management any longer." Basically, the story starts with this man who is a manager. Now, if anybody has dealt with a big company or even in real estate, you know that large corporations own large parcels of land or even farms. But it's not the top brass, it's not the CEO who takes care of the land. It's not the CFO who's taking care of receiving rent. They have managers to do that. And there are a lot of property managers, management companies out there, and this is what this man is. This man is a manager of a very rich person. And he's managing all of his assets, right? And so in the next verse, the manager said to him, but it says that he was wasting his possessions. This manager was not a good manager. He wasn't being integrous. He wasn't living a life of integrity. And so he wasted a lot of this manager's positions. And so like a good CEO, he basically said to this manager, "You're fired. You're fired." Verse 3, so the manager says to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." Now this is where this story gets interesting. This manager who was seen and experienced as squandering the master's money has this bright idea and says, "You know what? I'm just a manager. I work blue-collar job. I can't dig holes. I'm too ashamed to beg. I'm not going to stand outside on I-25 begging for money with my children and playing the accordion, whatever it is that they do. I can't beg, and I can't really lift my finger. So I'm very limited. So what can I do?" So he says, "Oh, I have this amazing idea." And look at what this guy decides to do. So in the next verse 5, he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" And this man replies, 900 gallons of olive oil. He replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. 450. He is basically shaving this man's debt in half. He owes the rich man, the CEO, the large corporation CEO, he owes him 900 gallons of oil. Olive oil. Does anybody know how much how many olives it takes to get a teaspoon of oil? Think about it for a moment. If you've ever had a salad with a whole olive in it, and you open up, you eat the outer crust of the olive, the flesh of the olive, and you see that pit, that seed? Well, people have to crush that completely to get just a small itty-bitty piece of oil, like a drop of oil. Did you all know that it takes about 40 to 45 olives? It takes 40 to 45 olives just to get 1 teaspoon of oil. Did you know that? Of olive oil. So I did the math, okay? And doing the math, actually, to get 900 gallons of oil, do you know that it would take 230,400 olives? 200, that's almost 250, 250,000 olives. You need 250,000 olives to produce 900 gallons of oil. And this is what this man owed him. One of my favorite shows is The Price is Right, admittedly, and I don't know if you guys like that show, but if you've ever tried to guess on the show, I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that right now. Walmart.com this morning, I looked this up this morning, so it's real-time money, okay? How much do you think this bottle, this 1 gallon, this is a 1 gallon bottle of Kavala extra virgin organic olive oil. How much do you think this bottle goes for? 15. Higher. 46, $39.99. You guys are getting closer, but higher. 60. You are over by 1 penny. by $1. You're over by $1. So whoever said 40 would have probably guessed it correct. That's the closest. This gallon is being sold on Walmart.com for $58.99 right now. If you do the math, 900 gallons actually equates to $53,091. This is what is owed to this master. $53,000. But this steward, this manager who's about to get fired, tells the debtor and says, you know what? I know you owe my master $53,000, but you know what? I'm going to give you a good deal. And you know Koreans, we love good deals, right? Asian Americans love good deals. The Chinese love good deals. Every Asian I know loves good deals. So he says, I give you a good deal. Give me just 450 gallons, and that's half off. I'm giving you half off of what you owe, $26,545. To the guy who owes the master, what do you think is going on his mind? He's like, oh my goodness, you are now my best friend. If there's any a time that you need anything, you know what? Because you saved me $26,000. You saved me $26,545. You know what? Whatever you want, man, it's yours. I'll have dinner over your house, whatever. If you need a place to stay, come. Visit me anytime you want. And that is what this man does. And he says, my goodness, he earns a friend because of the shrewdness of this manager's dealings. It's not only with olive oil, but he tells the second debtor, and he says this in verse 7. He says, then he asked the second, and how much do you owe, my friend? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. And he told him, take your bill and make it 800. Don't worry about it. Now, a bushel of wheat. I don't even want to go into the process. I was going to show you pictures, but it's really ridiculous. I mean, you have to, just to even get one bushel, you have to amass a large amount of wheat. And not only that, but you have to break it down, throw it up in the air, let the wind push it all out. And what you really get from a wheat, a small little wheat, you know the flour you make at home with bread flour? I mean, just a little speck of that. Do you know how hard it is to produce that? And this guy owes 1,000 bushels of wheat. Oh, this process, this guy tells him, look, I know you owe my master 1,000, but you know what? I'm going to give you a deal. And instead of owing the master 1,000, let me make it 800. Don't worry about it. What do you think this guy who owes 1,000 bushels, what do you think he's thinking in his mind? He's saying, oh my gosh, another deal. This is so amazing. Listen, you're about to be fired. I know that. But if you need anything from me, trust me, whatever's mine is yours. You can take it. I'll let you borrow my camel. I'll let you borrow my tent. Whatever you need, just anytime, you are welcome in my home. See, if you're the CEO and you caught your manager doing something like this, what would you say to that manager? You would probably be mad. You would probably be so upset and saying something like, $26,000, that's a lot of money in my pocket. You just messed me over. You screwed me over. Half of what this guy owes. And then the other guy, the bushels of wheat, where is my 200,000 bushels of wheat? 200 bushels of wheat. That's probably what a normal CEO probably would have said. But this is where the problem comes in the parable that a lot of people don't understand. And this is what Jesus says. So he says, the master, verse 8, The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. See, one of the reasons why we chose this parable is because out of the 40 some odd parables that Jesus gives, very rarely does he give an explanation. Very rarely. And we're going to see that in the future parables that we look at. There are not a lot of times that Jesus actually spells out what the parable is, because he is trying to help the people, the audience, come to their own conclusion. But this is one of the first and only, one of the few parables that Jesus actually explains. And he says this: the master, actually, we know from this parable that the master represents God. And what Jesus is saying is, because this master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted wisely. Now, shrewdly in the Greek does not mean like he's a bad man, the manager. This word shrewdly means more like wise. He actually used his own creative ways to come up with a way to bless his fellow neighbor. And so it says here, and I love this line. Jesus says in the verse 9, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Have you caught the fact that Jesus did not say if your wealth is gone? He says when it is gone. Do you know what Jesus is talking about? A lot of scholars debate about what he's talking about, but most experts really basically saying that Jesus here is talking about death. He's talking about death. Have you ever heard an old American saying, you'll never see a U-Haul behind a hearse? Do you know what that means? A hearse is, that car that, that carries your casket when you die. What that means is it's a metaphorical way of saying that you can't take your material possessions with you when you die. That saying suggests that the things that we accumulate in life, such as wealth and possessions, are not really that important in the grand scheme of things. The message that, a U-Haul does not follow a hearse is often used to emphasize the importance of focusing on things that have lasting value. Things like relationships, things like experiences, and other things like our personal growth. And that is exactly what Jesus is trying to say through this parable. He is telling he's spelling it out by saying, look, money, really, it's a gift from God. Just like this manager did nothing to produce the 900 gallons of oil. And just like this manager did nothing to gain the 1,000 bushels of wheat, it's a gift. It's a gift from God. And I think one of the things that really messes up our mindsets about money is many times we don't see money as a gift from God. We see it as something we earn. That's ours. That's mine. And this is kind of reflected in the book, J.R.R. Tolkien's, The Lord of the Rings, right? That Smeagol found the ring of power, but it possessed him so much that he said, it's mine, my precious. But it was never his to begin with. It was something he just simply found. And what Jesus is saying is, he's saying use the gifts of God not really for your own selves, but so that when it is gone, not if, because you can't take your $1 million with you. If you have more or less, whatever it is, you can't take your home with you. You can't take your cars with you. You can't take your boats and your RVs with you. You can't take any of this stuff with you. So what are we supposed to use it for? And what Jesus is saying is, use it to gain things of eternal significance, like friends and experiences and personal growth. Now, this morning, some of you may be, thinking to yourselves, well, how do I do that? Well, I think one of the things that he's encouraging us is to be creative in how we do this. Look, one way I thought is, has anybody here ever been to a block party? I mean, yeah, everyone loves block parties. I don't know who doesn't. Throw your neighborhood a block party, or do something that do something for your coworker that is more beyond than what you thought of. Maybe you notice that your coworker likes a certain perfume or a certain cologne. And you simply buy something for them as a gift. Not so that you're owed something back. Not so that, they're like, well, I owe you one now, right? No, not to gain favor, but just to do it. Do you know how much that person would really appreciate even the smallest act of kindness? One thing that my family, I know you're sick and tired of hearing this, but one thing that I know we can do, that my family uses their time, their treasures, and their talents with, is cooking, right? And I've shared this with many of you. Just this past Friday, there's my son Derek, my middle son, has made a really good friend in school, and he loves him absolutely to death. His name is Michael. And, he's become really good friends with him. And we found out as the parents drop us off, they drop the kids off, we sometimes talk with the parents, and we found out that they are members of the Church of LDS. I don't know if you know this, but it's Latter-day Saints. So another word for their church organization is they're Mormons. They're Mormons. Now, the thing is, I could simply, most Christians think, in order to reach other people for Christ, you have to invite them to church. I don't think that, binary. I don't think it's that crystal clear. Do you understand? For the Mormons, they are dedicated to their church, very dedicated. And to invite them to come to our church would be really a waste of my time and Jews' time. So we said to each other, well, what can we do to just bless them? I know they have different thoughts, and I know they have different prophets like Joseph Smith that we don't believe in. But that doesn't mean we can't be kind to them and use our talents, time, and our treasures with them. And so we found out that they grew up in Utah. Not a big surprise. And they grew up in a place called St. George. I had never heard of that place before. But they said they never ate Korean food ever in their entire lives. But the wife watches Korean K-pop, like dramas on Netflix. And she says this red cabbage thing, whenever they eat it, it looks so good. And every time they're drinking, now they can't drink, they're not allowed to drink alcohol, but every time they're drinking that soju, whatever, every time they're drinking that on the show, it looks so good and such an awesome thing. So I said, okay, well, we're not going to give you soju, but why don't you come to our house? And so they came this past Friday. And I actually looked up Korean restaurants in St. George. There's only 2. One is but one is a chain, and the other is an authentic place. And so I'm realizing, this is why they never try Korean food. Because I don't think there's a lot of Korean people in St. George, Utah. And so they came, and we took our time, we took our time in marinating all the meat. We made for them bulgogi, we made for them kalbi. And by the way, Mormon families, they're not small. They're a family of 6. So we were like, okay, we did the math. Holy cow, meat costs so much now. What is going on? So I did both. I bought both kalbi and bulgogi, marinated that thing. Ju did the keranjim, she did the panchan, she did the side dishes. And I mean, when they came in the house, they were like, oh my God, what is this? And they had never ever understood that you can put rice in a lettuce and wrap it up. They were like, oh my God, what is this food explosion in my mouth? And all night, they were talking about how good this was. This was amazing. And they said, you know what? They asked us about what we do. I told them I'm a pastor. And then they were like, oh, well, we're Mormon, right? And I'm like, yeah, I know, but that's okay, And we started talking about how Jesus is the only way, the truth, and the life. And then finally, after about 3 hours, I was like, oh man, okay, we got to go. But after about 3 hours, this guy says to me, you know what? What is your church like? And how long is the service? And I told him it's an hour. And the couple looks at each other like jaw drops. It's an hour? And I said, yeah. We do about 20 minutes of worship. We do 30 minutes of sermon, and then everybody kind of gets, to eat Korean food. And they're like, you eat Korean food in your church? I said, yeah, Mia and the Spoon Ministry. Anyway, they looked at each other, and I said, why are you so shocked? He said, we at the Mormon church have to stay a minimum of 3 hours. Our services are 3 hours long. And they said, we've been looking for a church that is less than 3 hours because our kids don't want to go. And so they started asking, what's your address? What time do you do service? Look, I'm not expecting them to come any day soon, but if they do, what a blessing. But the point is, we used our time, we used our treasures, and we used our talents to gain somebody of eternal relationships. Not just using it for our own selves, but we used it for somebody else, and look at what happened. I challenge you to talk to some of our newcomers today. Do you know that there's a newcomer who came today because of a simple act of kindness of being bought wine in a Southwestern flight? Listen, I don't know if you've flown recently, and I'm not looking forward to flying to New York, but there's a lot of crazy people up in the air that cause a lot of problems. And if someone bought me a nice glass of wine, I'd be their best friend for the next 3 hours. And that is why they are here. Because of a simple act of kindness. And what Jesus is asking us is that we use our money not for ourselves, but we use it to gain eternal significance. And then the second principle here is that your actions reflect your heart. It says here, Jesus says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who's going to trust you with handling true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give property of your own? Just because for the sake of time, I realize my time is running out, and so I'm going to go through this really quick. The second principle that Jesus is actually spelling out in this parable is your actions reflect your heart. There was a church member, but back when I was church planting, I remember this church member. He had the greatest heart, man. The guy meant really well, but he said, Pastor Howard, right now my family, we're going through a lot of, financial issues. And once we become millionaires, once we get that $1 million, then we'll tithe to the church. I remember him saying that. And I remember thinking deep down in my heart, and I remember God telling me, look, if he's not tithing now, he ain't going to tithe when he gets $1 million. Because when he gets $1 million, it's just even more problems and more issues that he's going to have to deal with. What Jesus is saying here, especially in the middle verse, verse 11, so if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? What is he talking about? True riches is the things of God. And if God can't trust you with the little that he's given you, then how is he going to trust you with a lot? And I know many times people are always saying, well, if I just had another million, or if I just made another 500, half a million, or 500,000, then I'll do all these things. Then I'll give to the poor. Then I'll do this. No, your heart already tells you where you're at. You're looking for more. You're not satisfied with what you have. And so you'll never give out of plenty if you're not even giving out of little. That's the second principle. And finally, the third principle is this. He spells it out in verse 13. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And the saddest part of this entire parable comes in this next verse, verse 14. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things, and then they were scoffing at him. Scoffing in the Greek means basically putting their nose up and saying, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. How dare he lecture us about money? We are rabbis. We are Pharisees. We are the best of the best. And they were so upset that Jesus would talk to them the fact that you can't serve God and money. Why is Jesus saying this? Because those two masters are diametrically opposed. Have you ever worked in a company or a place or educational facility, wherever, where you had two managers saying the exact opposite things? One manager is saying, hey, I want you to do this for me. But then another manager comes out and says, well, I get paid more than he does. You got to do this first. Do you know what that's like? You can't have two masters over you. And in the same way, what Jesus is saying is these two masters, money and God, they're diametrically opposed. Do you know why? Because money or gold always says, take, take, take. That's what gold says. But God says, give, give, give. See, they're two diametrically opposed ideas, and they're against each other. You know, gold says, think of yourself. Take care of yourself first. Life is all about you. That's what gold says. God says, life is not about you. Think about others first and take care of your brothers and sisters. Do you see the diametrically opposed nature between gold and God? And finally, gold says, you know what? It's okay to be unethical. As long as it puts more money in your pocket, it's okay. It's okay to lie. It's okay to cheat. It's okay to steal to get ahead. And I say this with only 1 month left where we have to return our taxes. And this is a big argument in the church. Do we do what's right? Well, God says, see, gold says, you can cheat, that's okay. God says you have to be straight as an arrow. Be holy like I am holy. It is not okay to lie. It is not okay to cheat. It is not okay to steal from others so that you can get ahead. Because it will come back and catch up to you one way or another. You see the diametrically opposed natures of these two, and that's why Jesus says, you cannot both serve God and money. I will finish my sermon this morning by sharing with you John Calvin's quote. John Calvin was the leading French Protestant reformer in the 1500s, and he's actually one of the most important figures in the second generation of the Protestant Reformation, right after Martin Luther. And he says this, where riches hold the dominion of the heart, God has lost his authority. Because covetousness makes us slaves of the devil. This morning, I want us to just have a time of prayer and reflection as we close our eyes and bow our hearts.